Welcome to Heart UK's webinar on how to eat healthily during the coronavirus lockdown. Just a few introductions and housekeeping before we start. So my name is Christopher Allen. I'm the head of healthcare for Heart UK, which is the UK's only cholesterol charity covering all cholesterol conditions and blood fat. I am a cardiovascular disease nurse by background. I've specialised in the area for about 10 years now. And this is the second in our series of webinars that we're hosting to try and help support people through this time. We understand that the NHS is under more strain than ever before, and anything that we can do to help support people, we're absolutely willing to do. My colleague here is Lynn Garton. She is a registered dietitian. If you'd just like to give a quick intro, Lynn.
Hello everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. My name's Lynn Garton. I'm a dietitian and I have been a dietitian for many years, so I'm delighted to be able to share some of my experience hopefully tonight.
Just a quick bit of housekeeping before we start as well. So we do record all of these sessions. That means that if people couldn't join us live, then that means they can watch it later on our website. So if you do have to duck out at some point, please do feel free. This recording will be uploaded sometime, hopefully later this week or next week. We can't see you, we can't hear you, but you should be able to see and hear us. So don't worry about what you're doing in the background. There should be absolutely no issues there at all. Also, like I said, we're looking to do these over a course of up until maybe the end of the year. We don't know how long the situation will go on for. So every 1 to 2 weeks, we will look to host some of these webinars. We have a 500 people capacity, so please do sign up as soon as you can to avoid any disappointment. We unfortunately can't give any specific medical advice or comment on individual circumstances, but we will do our best to answer all of your questions. We have had some questions through already, which is fantastic, and we're going to look to address those as soon as we can. We've got some pre-prepared information for you as well, just to help you along the way. And as with any charity, any donations are gratefully received. So the work that we do, we feel is incredibly important. We would love to be able to do more and host more of these webinars, but obviously funding dependent. So any donations, no matter how small you can give us, that would be very much appreciated. So let's dive in, guys. So basically, Lynn, as a registered dietitian who's been working for a very long time, in your words, mine, should we be eating any differently now that we're in this social distancing lockdown situation?
Well, generally, the answer is no. These dietary principles still stay the same as the advice that we give on the Heart UK website, which is to eat plenty of fruit and vegetables, to choose a wide variety of healthy protein sources, such as things like fish, pulses, chicken, nuts, seeds, some lean red meat, to choose whole grain and high fibre starchy foods, to include healthy fats from vegetable oils, to have fewer foods in foods which are high in fat, high in sugar, such as fizzy drinks and biscuits and cakes and chocolates, and to also eat the right amount of foods to maintain a healthy weight. Now, whilst this way of eating is good for cholesterol management, it is also good for our overall health, which does include the immune system, as it's providing a wide range of nutrients that our bodies need. But what might be different at this time is how we get those foods into the various food groups. So we might have a different routine. We might not be able to pop out to the shops to get that I don't know, loaf of bread that we normally would have, or it might be that the foods might not just be available. But there are ways in which you can still include all of those food groups into your diet. So for example, fruit and vegetables, it's not just fresh fruit and veg that counts, it's also frozen, dried, tinned. So with frozen vegetables and fruit, they are just as nutritious as the fresh varieties, because often they've been frozen just after they've been picked. And in terms of dried fruit, 1 tablespoon of dried fruit is the equivalent of a portion of fruit. So you might have some sultanas or currants or dried fruit lurking in the back of the cupboards, but you can add those to things like your cereal or to yogurts. With the tinned vegetables, things like, I mean, chopped tomatoes still count as one of your 5 a day, and those can be used to make various types of sauces. And pulses, whilst we think of pulses such as beans and lentils as a good source of protein and fibre, they also do count as one of your 5 a day, but they only count once. So no matter how much you have, they can only count as one of your 5 a day. And if you're choosing tinned fruits, then to try to choose it in natural juice, and maybe even think about some vegetables which have a longer shelf life. So things like carrots or sweet potato, butternut squash, they tend to keep for longer. So that's sort of different ways in which you can get fruit and vegetables into your diet if you can't get the fresh varieties. And in terms of the healthy protein sources, well, again, there's frozen fish, there's frozen chicken and lean meats, but there's also pulses. I mean, so the beans and the lentils, they make great meat extenders if you're adding them to stews or casseroles or curries, but you can also use them in pasta dishes, you can use them in salads, you can use them, I mean, they've got a whole host of ways you could use those. And then we mustn't forget tinned fish, because we do recommend that we should be eating 2 portions of fish a week, one of which should be oily. But tinned fish, such as sardines or mackerel, they all count. So they make great dishes in things like pasta dishes, again on jacket potatoes, or even in sandwiches. So there's again a different way, maybe different ways of being able to include those foods. We've got the high fibre and whole grain starchy foods, which tend to have a longer shelf life, but I don't know if you're anything like me, I've got some of those things like bulgur wheat and pearl barley that I've always wanted to give a go but never got round to doing it. So it might be a great opportunity to get creative with some of those things that you've got lurking in your background.
Now's the time to be brave.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And in the back of the cupboard.
Yeah, and we've also got great recipes on the Heart UK website. So get those creative juices flowing. And in terms of the low-fat dairy, I mean, things like yogurt and cheeses tend to have a longer shelf life. And things like milk, you can freeze milk. So it's again another way you can still get ways of getting those foods into your diet at this time. It's just requiring maybe being a bit more creative, maybe being a bit more some more planning may be required. So for example, it's quite a good idea to take a look and take stock at what you've got currently, and then only shop for what you need, because we're hearing now that the supermarkets are getting food back on the shelves. And that could save money, as well as cut down on food waste, because we are seeing quite a lot of food waste because of the initial stockpiling that happens.
Yeah. It's quite sad to see that much food be thrown away and know that actually a lot of it is still viable. There are people out there who can't afford that food on the best of times, and it's being thrown away. It's what's interesting that's come out of all this is that more than ever we know that we're stocking up on things that are in packets or tins that last for a long time. So obviously check the best before dates on those. Don't throw them away just because you don't think you'll eat them yet. They tend to have a long shelf life. There are benefits to cooking from scratch. You know exactly what's going into your food. So, added sugars and salts and saturated fat that may be in some products that come pre-prepared, just be cautious and then make sure that you cook from scratch as much as possible. As Lynn said, planning in advance is incredibly helpful. We all now more than ever seem to have a lot of time on our hands. So if you want to do a bit of meal planning and sit down together and investigate some new foods and tastes, now is a good time to do that. As Lynn said, we have loads of really delicious Heart UK recipes. I've tried some myself and they are delicious. So do have a look on our website and try those. Some of the questions we've had, Lynn, around diet, and surprisingly, considering coronavirus at the moment, is surrounding immunity and eating to support your immunity, eating to boost your immunity, things that I shouldn't eat because they affect my immune system. There's lots of things going around on social media and in the newspapers. We've also had questions about fasting as well. I would like to say that we are going to cover this topic in detail in a few weeks' time, actually. So we have a special webinar towards the end of the month where we will specifically talk about the immune system and diet. So if your questions aren't answered in detail now, we will get to them. But Lynn, what does a dietitian with many years experience have to say about food and about our immune system as a whole?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting, Chris, because you're absolutely right. It seems that there's many different sort of dietary patterns and foods and nutrients that are being promoted to support our immune system. But just to say that the immune system isn't just one thing, or it's not just one organ. It's an intricate and delicate system which requires many, many different components. And it's for that reason that it requires a whole range of nutrients, a whole range of vitamins and minerals, no one specific thing in particular. And a healthy immune system actually likes to be in balance. And in fact, if we had an overactive immune system, it could actually lead to problems such as things like allergies or even autoimmune diseases. So again, and in terms of the European Food Safety Authority, which looks at the evidence to determine whether or not a food product can have a health claim, and in this case it would be for immunity, and they haven't approved any foods to have on packaging that particular food helps the immune system, and they go through all the evidence. So again, and they've actually had quite a lot of foods that have gone through the system and have been rejected. But when it comes to fasting, it's interesting, but there's been some research to suggest that fasting may help with the immune system. But there's been no reliable human studies to say that this is the case. There's been some work done in mice, but those mice were, they had their immune system destroyed by chemotherapy, and it was during the refeeding time that they found that there seemed to be some benefits to the immune system. But they're mice, they're not humans. We can't translate that data from animals to humans, so we've got to be really careful with that. And I would say probably now's not the time to start undertaking any particular drastic diet or a change in diet, or even, I mean, things like we don't really know enough about the virus, the coronavirus. And I think if you start maybe fasting, it could be that you end up not eating enough nutrients, which could result in undernutrition. And what we do know about undernutrition is it does compromise the immune system, and then it does predispose you to infection. So now's not the time. It's more important to eat just a general healthy balanced diet to get the full range of nutrients that you need.
As a general rule, so I'm not a dietitian, I'm a nurse, but obviously we field questions from all kinds of people who ask about not just their medical aspects of their health, but their diet. And one of the things that I'm quite keen on saying is, as far as diet and things go, is if it sounds faddy, it probably is. This is the issue that we have with dietary research, is that we have huge studies that look at how diet impacts us. But now is not the time to be testing the water with strange diets that promise lots of wonderful things that may not be sustainable in the long term, because we don't know how that will affect your health with this virus. As Lynn said, a balanced diet, including all the different food groups. There aren't food groups that you should be cutting out unless a healthcare professional has told you otherwise. All the food groups have their different benefits and different things that we need from them. So with that in mind, you know, we talk about vitamins, we talk about minerals, we talk about how we get those from our diet, but what we need to talk about as well is supplements. This is a really hot topic for any healthcare charity, whether it's cancer or whether it's cardiovascular disease. So Lynn, if you could just give us a quick overview of, you know, our stance on supplements.
Well, yeah, I think in terms of this particular time, it often comes up because, again, it goes back to, should we be taking supplements to support the immune system? And generally, we should be able to get all the vitamins and minerals from a healthy, balanced diet. And going back to what you were saying, Chris, I think sometimes it's this way of eating and what we're explaining sounds just boring. And then you hear of a new diet and that sounds really interesting. I'm going to give that a go. But what we haven't got is we haven't got the research on those types of diets for the long term. I think some of the diets which are being investigated at the moment may only be up to 2 years, but we don't know what the impact of following those types of diets are long term. And nutrition research, and as you said, nutrition science is a specialist field, because there are so many different things to examine, and we really have to look at the totality of the evidence. We've got to look at everything, all the evidence. And what we do know in terms of, for cholesterol management specifically, the advice that we give out is all evidence-based. It's in line with all the professional organisations and associations that review the data. And we, at the end of the day, we have to translate that science into sort of dietary advice that everybody can just take on board. We don't eat nutrients, we eat food, and we don't eat food in isolation. We eat diets. So it's about trying to get all of that information into those messages that we provide. And as I say, I think sometimes they can seem boring, but they are the most reliable and evidence-based information. But as I say, going back to supplements, sorry, I've sort of gone on a different tangent there, Chris, sorry about that. Supplements, so generally we get them from the Healthy Balanced Diet. The exception at this time is potentially vitamin D, which we need for healthy bones and teeth and muscles. And that's because at this time of year, we should be getting most of our vitamin D from the sunshine. However, if we are sort of in the house and we're not getting out for 20 to 30 minutes out in the sunshine, then it may be that it's advisable to take a vitamin D supplement. That's probably the only one. And we're looking at the amount is, the recommendation is 10 micrograms a day. And you can get those from supermarkets and from pharmacists. We're not looking at mega doses, it's around that 10 micrograms a day.
It's interesting with dosages. I mean, when people are ill, they often say that they load upon their vitamin C and they take all these different kinds of supplements. And actually, when you look into it, vitamin C is what we call water soluble.
Yeah.
Once you have 100% of your vitamin C intake for the day, the rest of it just gets peed out.
Yes,
you don't retain it. So we have to understand how these things act in the body and how they're just, some people will need supplements. Some people will need to have things like calcium supplemented, potassium, vitamin D, because they have various different conditions. But those are based on prescriptions. So as Lynn said, if you're taking any kind of supplements, the other thing to be aware of is that even though it may be a natural remedy, even though it may look and appear to be a natural product, they can interact with your medications. So before you start to take anything new, always double check, at least with a pharmacist, to make sure that it's safe and it's okay. There are some interactions out there that you wouldn't expect, that can alter the way that your medications work. They might make your statins less effective. They might affect your blood pressure. They might make your blood more or less likely to clot if you're on clot busting drugs. So do be careful on what kinds of things that you take.
Yeah, and also, sorry, Chris, if you have been advised by your doctor to have some vitamins and minerals on prescription, don't not take them, because they will be given for a reason. So if you've been prescribed them by your health professional, then continue to take them. This is more if you are just worried about that your diet may not be giving you enough, then it's, as Chris said, you know, in some cases, if it's a water soluble vitamin, you'll pee it out. But if it's the other way is a fat soluble vitamin, they can get stored in the body. And again, having too much of anything, we don't want potentially any of those vitamins or minerals stored up in excess, because the body is a very finely tuned machine, and we just want to keep it in that healthy balance.
Absolutely. Again, balance seems to be the key for everything. So not too much, not too little, and your entire body actually works on that principle that everything is in balance, and too much or too little of anything can have lots of different effects. So the take home from that is that we shouldn't all be loading up on extra vitamins and things like that in capsule form. But equally, as well as not, you know, eating lots of that kind of stuff, we shouldn't also be eating too much in general. And also, we're spending more time at home and more likely to snack. I know that I haven't dared to get any snacks in because I'm spending a lot more time at home and they're there all the time. So what would your tips be around snacking? And it's the physical issue of snacking, but it's also the mental side, isn't it, that's important?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, during these times, many of us have been forced into a new routine, and we have to establish these new routines. And we've got constant access to the kitchen. But we don't, as you say, Chris, we don't actually just satisfy our physical hunger. So that's to get sustenance, but we also potentially use food to satisfy what I call a head hunger. And by that, I mean to satisfy our emotional needs. So it might be using food if we're or wanting to eat food if we're feeling angry or stressed or
Bored.
depressed or bored. Absolutely.
Yeah, very bored.
Absolutely. And what foods do you go for when you're feeling bored, Chris?
High sugar, high very sweet and tasty. It's a comfort, isn't it? We're all spending a lot more time. We've got more time to think than ever. I think that's one of the interesting things to come out of this sort of social distancing situation is we all have more time than ever to consider our lives, our relationships, everything that's going on at the moment. And that with it generates anxiety, generates stress, generates depression in some people. And things that we tend to reach for, whether it be food or tobacco products or alcohol or whatever people's vices. Just a time to remind ourselves. And obviously, for mental health support, there are charities out there such as Mind and the Samaritans you can always turn to if you do have those types of issues.
And the thing is, it becomes a problem more when you're turning to these foods more and more frequently to as an emotional crutch, and that's when it becomes more of a problem. And so to try to overcome this, I think first of all it is about getting back into that routine and establish sort of regular meal patterns, eating with the family if the family are with you at this time, and so that will help satisfy your physical hunger, so you're less likely to maybe get hungry and reach for the high fat, high sugar foods. But then the other thing is maybe to keep those foods put away at the back of a cupboard, because there is some research to suggest it's basically out of sight, out of mind. If they're not visible to you, they're not acting as a trigger for you. So and then maybe making a list of healthy alternatives and getting some of those in. So things like, popcorn, for example, not with the sugar or the salt, but plain popcorn's actually a whole grain. So that would be a great way of getting more whole grains into your diet. Things like rice cakes, things like maybe sort of some low-fat yogurts with nuts and seeds and dried fruit. Maybe even things like got sort of Easter around the corner, a hot cross bun or a plain scone. Those would be better than going for the sort of rich cakes and the chocolates and the biscuits. And if you find yourself you do kind of start to recognize that you are eating these foods more for emotional reasons, it might be worthwhile trying to identify what that trigger is. So is it because you're angry? Is it because you're bored? Is it because you're anxious? So to identify that, and that can be done if you wanted to use a food diary. So first of all, the good strategy is identify the trigger, and then the next step would be to try to find an alternative coping mechanism. So for example, if you're bored, it might be that you write a list and say, okay, if I'm bored, I am going to, and it might be going for a walk if you haven't done your sort of exercise or gone out for the day. It might be that you're going to have a bath. It might be that you're going to ring a friend. And if it may be that you want to use your brain more, so it distracts you from that trigger. So maybe puzzles or Sudokus or crosswords. So to think of other outlets, and then it's actually having a list to having that sort of coping strategy. When I am bored, I will do, and have your list, or when I am anxious, I will do, and have your list. And then finally, just to say, to take away the guilt as well of emotional eating, because I think we are living in anxious times. It is worrying, and we've always said that kind of that 80-20 rule, 80% of the time eating as healthily as you can. But if there is some of the times when you do go for one of the chocolate or the cakes or what have you, don't beat yourself up about it. Use it as a learning experience and think, why did I do that? And then maybe think about, as I say, those other alternatives that could be done.
now more than ever, it's important to look after your mental health and
Absolutely.
also support the needs of others. So, you know, we should all be less critical of each other, less judgmental, trying to make sure that we support each other, because these are unprecedented times. We don't know how this is going to pan out. We still have trickles of information that come through. This is not something that most of us experience ever in our lifetime. So it's that whole message of be kind to each other, isn't it? So in our sort of final 4 minutes or so, we did want to cover as well the other side of things. So I am incredibly hungry now. We've been talking about all this food. So I hope everyone's had dinner. But the other side of it is, if you're feeling ill and you have no appetite, what do you do then? Because we know that having a good nutritional status when you're ill helps you to recover, and sometimes mean that your illness lasts for a shorter amount of time.
Yeah, so it is, as you say, it is still important to stay well hydrated and as well nourished as you can manage. So if you are sick, or it might be thinking in advance about having some foods that are easy to prepare, and that might be things like canned soups, it might be things like microwave meals, it might be things like microwave frozen meals, microwave rice and so forth. And you could also take this opportunity when you're well, maybe, to cook in bulk and then freeze. And so dishes like, I'm thinking of bolognese sauce, for example. If you cooked a bolognese sauce, you could actually use that sauce to make different things like chili con carnes or shepherd's pies, or so you've got those and freeze them, and you can then just use those if you aren't feeling like
stuff them full of extra vegetables, stuff them full of extra pulses.
Absolutely.
Opportunities to think about your red meat intake as well, isn't it? And say,
absolutely,
let's half the amount of mince that I normally use and pack in some lentils instead, or something that's quite satisfying and fills you up.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, if you're feeling ill and you're not really feeling like eating anything, it's maybe trying to just eat a little and often, rather than trying to have those 3 regular meals. And try and avoid having drinks just before you're eating, because that can fill you up and you're less likely then to eat. And sometimes it can be useful to what we call fortify your foods. So if you're really not eating a lot at all, you really want to make every mouthful count. You want to make them as nutritious as possible. So one of the things that can be done is, for example, fortifying your milk. So to a pint of milk, you'd add a few tablespoons of milk powder, skim milk powder, and that gives you extra more protein and more calories. Or you could use then that for cereals, on your breakfast cereals, for milk puddings, or for things like mashed potatoes. So it's getting more nutrition in that way. Or you could add extra sort of vegetable spreads, maybe to some vegetables, or to any toast or butter, or even things like using ground almonds, or peanut butters, the nut butters, so things like porridges, porridge soups, smoothies and so forth. So you can do that if really you're not feeling like eating much at all. And I think you've got to also think that at this time, it doesn't really matter so much about what you're eating. It's about actually eating if you really, really don't feel like it. And I think, maybe the healthy eating principles that we've outlined earlier, it's not going to be appropriate this time, because healthy eating, the kind of, I suppose, the benefits of healthy eating are what you're doing the majority of the time, not what you're doing the minority.
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of wraps things up quite nicely. I did get a few emails in that I've tried to address, and we've had a lot in, so thank you so much for your interest. I'm going to share my screen, because one of the questions that we did have was around cholesterol results, unsurprisingly. So as the UK's only specialist cholesterol charity, this is a question we have all the time. So as you can see here, these are a very, very general guide for the average person in the population as to what their cholesterol results would be. With the caveat, if you have conditions like you have heart disease already, you have diabetes, you've already had a heart attack or stroke, people with inherited conditions, for example, their target ranges will be much lower than these. But as a general rule, these are the numbers that you aim for. So as a total, it would be less than 5. Your non-HDL, which is an addition of all your different types of bad cholesterol, less than 4. Your LDL cholesterol, which is a type of bad cholesterol, less than 3. your HDL cholesterol, 1 for a man, 1.2 for a woman, and with your ratio above 6 would be considered high risk. What we would advise as well is that these numbers all have to be taken as a package deal. You shouldn't just get your total cholesterol and leave it there. You shouldn't just get your ratio and then leave it there. It's incredibly important we understand the breakdown of these things, because they can have very, very different advice when you get different results. And it also depends on your personal, your family history and your health status. So I thought I would make sure that I got that in there. This is all on our website, heartuk.org.uk, where you can see all the information that we've included here. There is lots of extra information too. Keep an eye on your inbox for more webinars. We're going to be doing them every 1 to 2 weeks on various different topics. Let us know if you have any ideas. Drop us an email and we'll try and squeeze some things in. But we're really happy with how this is going. We hope that you've got something from this webinar and enjoyed it. Do email us if you have any feedback. And this session, as I said, will be recorded and uploaded to the website where you can see it there. So that's it from Lynn and I. You'll probably see our face again sometime very soon. We're going to do some more of these with some extra panel members, and we've got guests in. We've got some people coming from Diabetes UK to talk to us as well. So we're excited about what we're going to do, and we're also going to provide things for healthcare professionals too, all free of charge, to make sure we're helping to support the NHS. And in turn, if anybody wanted to give us a donation, we'd really appreciate it, no matter how small it is, to help us continue the work that we're doing. So thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy your dinner if you've not had it already. And Lynn and I will speak to you really soon.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.